My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Srisankaran, Guru Piranyo, fellow nannies. Today I'm going to continue the final chapter of the Katha Upanishad, and we still have a few important passages to go through. In this discussion today, I'm going to take you through the conversation between Lord Yama and Nachiketa. And here he is trying to make the case of why do some people are able to get it and some cannot get it, right? Get it means become aware of that substratum that is transcendental, that substratum, the Brahman that is imprinted in all of us. Why is it that some get it and some don't get it? And we had a lot of discussion over the last few months that how this, there is something within us that is transcendental and that is not touched by space and time, but that substratum is embodied by the body that is, an artifact of our material universe and the forces and the principles that governs this material universe, which has space and time. So we have that substratum that is transcendental, but also we have it is infused into that which has got limitations. And to function in this material world, we have a mind and the intellect, and the mind seems to be caught up in this material world, unable to dislodge from it and to experience and become aware of its transcendental nature. So, because this part is really important, because this ultimately leads to understanding of that Brahman and also answering the question, what happens after death? So here he explains in these passages, which is the passage 10, he says that why some people can get it, right? So here he says in this passage 10, he says when the 5 organs of perception stop working, that means the sensory organ that is continuously receiving information from the material world, when that stops working and it merges into the mind, everything merges into the mind, and the intellect too retires or goes to sleep. He says that that is the state that the scholars describe as the highest spiritual state, the state of no mind, the state of silence. So here he explains that this process that we go through to attain that spiritual state or the Brahman state, or the state that is, has the highest spiritual state, which is beyond senses, mind, and intellect. This is the state that gives you the pure awareness of that self, or the Atman, that which, gives you that infinite possibilities and potentialities. He says, these great saints and sages know that understanding, they're aware of it, but they also know that how to quieten that 5 sensory organs, to the indriyas, because except for sleep, when all of them are quiet, when the moment it wakes up, it is fully awake to the material world. Hence, it distracts the mind from understanding who it is. So these great saints and sages then, through their practices, through yoga and through introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation, they learn this technique of quietening it down. So the senses often, goes out, like a horse. They're able to bring it, hold it together and bring it down. So, the mind, he says that it merges, the mind merges with all the sensory perception, merges with the mind, the manas, and slowly it withdraws from the gravity of materiality and it anchors into that one force. And Mahan used to say that Unarva Gavani, he said, focus on that which is silent, and once it's merged, it attains the state of silence. And you see that even the buddhi, the intellect that is continuously trying to analyze the thought, every thought it tries to analyze, even that goes to, sometimes when there's nothing there, also the buddhi tries to analyze what this is. Even that drops. See, so the whole process of discriminating, what is real, unreal, all that stops. All the analysis, everything stops. So the buddhi also ultimately goes quiet. For some people, even though it withdraws, the buddhi is still trying to analyze what is this. Even that goes to that quietude state. You ultimately attain that complete stillness. This is the deep meditation state, right? And this is the highest spiritual state that one gets, that kind of blissful state where you have absolutely no activity, no mind, no intellect, only pure awareness of that self. Right? He says it's beyond any thought, because thoughts is a measurement of the material experience. All that disappears. So he says there's an evolution one goes through this deep introspection, contemplation, reflection, and that meditative state, right? And in the early days, it's difficult, but as you continuously, through patience, perseverance, persistence of this practice, ultimately it leads you to the final destination or the fourth destination, which is, you gravitate from the first to the second to the third. And then as you prolong your meditational practice and continuously be conscious of it, you see that you attain that absolute state of silence. And in that absolute state of silence, one fine day you get the glimpses of that self. Maybe for a short moment, and then that you hold on to it, and slowly, slowly that prolongs, and you get that amazing experience of your true nature. And you feel that limitedness become limitless, right? That selfish state becomes selfness, selfless, and self-realized. So this evolution starts taking place in the mind. Very similar to the body, right? When the body is not toned, as you keep practicing and staying focused, you see that eventually the body gets toned. In that same way, when the mind becomes toned, it attains that self, the true nature, that infinite potentiality and possibilities. And the scriptures, and Nachiketa is being informed by Lord Yama, this is the ultimate purpose of our human life, to be able to experience this Brahman in all its magnificence. So he explains that. See, but when the when there's turbulence of the senses, mind, and intellect, it is very difficult to realize this self. So he says the self only is realized when one attains that highest spiritual form or spiritual state. He says that silence leads to stillness, the stillness leads to self-realization, the self-realization leads to that immortality and that infinite possibilities. So in this passage, Lord Yama is explaining to Nachiketa. Then he goes on to explain in the next passage. He says that according to the yogins, these are the people who actually allocate time for introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation. He says the state in which an organ are at complete rest in yoga. So in yoga, actually, it's that union, all this, sensory becomes, it goes to sleep. It's in a state of slumber into that self. That's what yoga means. It means to be in union with. He says that that's what a yogin is, one who practices yoga to enable the senses to become one with that self, or when the mind becomes focused to attain that self. So he says that this yogin never makes a mistake. He says, for instance, he's not attracted by sensory pleasures because he is one with the self. is transcendental to all the material experience, divinized all the material experience. He says, but this yogic state may have its fall just as it is right. So sometimes the yogi get this amazing experience, and often what happens is that the fragments of the mind is still there. So when they get this exhilarating, blissful experience, sometimes the ego also grows. So here he says that the complete rest of all organs, that means sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, all are merged, you know. And when all of them are quiet, the buddhi also becomes quiet. One attains that self. This is what he calls the pure awareness of beyond the mind and intellect. So in that yogic state, he says that no mistake, mind is the yogic, someone who knows this, he knows this very, very clearly. And the intellect is steady. And the discrimination between when my mind was anchored on my senses, this is how my mind's behavior was. If it is not, this is how it is. And they're not attracted to the sensory pleasures. Yes, sensory pleasures are part of the material world, but they actually become transcendental, right? And that enables them to actually search the truth with a lot of clarity and also harmony, and to be able to live an enlightened, divinizing every moment in their lives. So he says the one who practices this daily, he says they abide by the truthful living. You see that they attain that pure awareness. See? And when they attain that pure awareness, you have that inner freedom in you. The liberation. You get unconditional, boundless peace. So he says that. So yoga is stilling that waves in our mind, and we get sometimes caught up with the waves. In the whirlpool or in the amazing turbulence of the wave, we miss the ocean. So he says that when the waves calm down, when you have still water, we experience that ocean of that self. So he's explaining in this that he wants to get Nachiketa to understand that with all this noise of this material senses and the mind that is caught up in the turbulence, unable to see the true nature of the self that is transcendental beyond birth and death, he's explaining this. He says, for you to do this, one needs to have a quiet mind, quiet intellect, and ultimately you see a sense of clarity comes. The clarity, the awareness of the self experience become great. So he then goes on to, this yogic also, those who practice this also sometimes fall in this trap, right? That they have this notion of, you know, uh, they this absorption samadhi state, they get that deep dhyana or meditation, and you see that slowly, the material world becomes quiet, and there's a sense of, a disciplined living, not perturbed. Mind is not perturbed by it. But you see, what also happens, and happens for most people, when they start up meditation, when they start up practice, wow, they're all so excited, they get everything. And then somehow complacency set in, they don't allocate time. See, it's not just meditation, but carrying that vibration and the feeling throughout your day, in all your interactions, in your job, in your relationships, and everything. Then after a while, when they become so complacent, the mind becomes so, used to it, it becomes complacent. So it becomes very callous. It gets distracted by things, anger, hatred, and so on. So he says that, then they start becoming attached to all the things, fame and, material things and all those things. And then they get allured, they get trapped back into the desire. And it's very difficult to get back to that. So he says that, they return back to the ordinary consciousness. So they work really hard to get to the supreme consciousness and then become complacent. And then they fall down and come back to the ordinary consciousness and get born by this ignorance. He says this cycle goes on and on. I've seen this with many disciples. They start out great, they read the book, they travel everywhere the guru is, or follow the guru. you know the moment it becomes complacent, they get subsumed by everything, family, friends. I'm not saying they are not important. They become preoccupied. They become so caught up. you know all the excuses start coming in, and then you see things start going down. So they again become caught up by that, ignorance. So this cycles repeats over and over again. I've seen this in many times where there are times that things don't work out, they eventually give up. Right? So he says that practice leads. So as I said, in that first thing is that, I said that the values are so important. Holding on to the values, the GP Mahan values, which is that that gratitude that somebody showed you this. And Nachiketa so had a lot of gratitude for Lord Yama for showing him this, and he held on to it. And that gracefulness in the mind to be able to say, I don't know everything, but I want to learn. And Nachiketa keeps asking. So that's an important quality. But he also says that practice, one must have that patience, perseverance, and persistence to that practice. Only that leads to stability of the mind, the clarity of the mind. You see? And that clarity leads to wisdom, and the wisdom leads to freedom. You see? Freedom from the clutches of materialities, the gravity of materialities. And ultimately, when the mind breaks away from the gravity of materiality, it rests, it's attracted, it's wedded and welded to the Art Brahman, or the self. And ultimately, you see that through this practice of, every day meditating, carrying that mindset with positivity, the purity, the yogin, becomes established in that eternal self. Though they are operating in this material world, they are not perturbed by the changes in the material world or the turbulence of the material. They go with the flow, right? So in this passage, he explains that, the yogi may have its fall. So sometimes they become so confident, so material, because everybody is seeking you, and you got fame and fortune and all those things. Even the yogins get caught in this trap. So, my guru, Mahan, he was very simple. He never let things get to his head. He just did his duty in a simplest, most, humble way. So we see this, that, true yoga is about a complete rest, not being caught up by things. Both the senses, mind, intellect, everything, withdraws to that self. That's what pure awareness and that eternal and freedom is. So here he speaks about that practice of that deep introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation, to attain, to become aware of it, to sustain in it, and to be free from everything. So in this passage, he explains. Then he says that this is actually a very subjective experience. Everybody wants an object-based experience, and be able to describe it. He says very nicely, one who knows this, they know that this self or the Brahman is a subjective experience, not an object-based experience. What do I mean by subjective experience? It means that it is beyond speech, right, and thought. Because thought is actually a measure of experience of this material world. It's difficult to describe this in words. Everything you describe it, the vocabulary is not there. He says, it is beyond the eyes, the sensory organs, because what we see is actually a light radiation of the objects. He says it's beyond that object. So if you're seeing things, it is a radiation of an object that is coming to our eyes. But if this is not an object, it's a subject, what can the eye see? The eyes cannot see anything. You see? So he says, yet some people, so we cannot hear it, we cannot cognize it with our all our sensory organs. It's beyond our thought, right? Beyond all our senses, sight, smell, hearing, taste, touch. Beyond that, how do I describe this? You see? So, he says that, but how can I demonstrate to others who do not believe? They are so caught up with this material world, right? So, a yogin or somebody who spends time that experience that in the silence, you experience that soul force of the self, right? So, how did these people, they have that object body? What differentiates them from others, right? Well, what differentiates them is that most ordinary people are so caught up in this material things, they have no time for knowing the truths of the scriptures or the Katha Upanishad or anything that shows you the map to this or roadmap to get there. Right? Most people want a roadmap for material gains and material fulfilling their material desires. Right? Yes, we go to university, we go to all the places, we take courses to learn about the material world, to become rich and peaceful. All that is an object driven. But very few people take the time to read and be inspired by the words of the scriptures or the teachers and to realize it exists. So many of the teachers, sometimes when you first start, you don't know, but you have to have that, trust and be inspired by the words of the teachers. So, in many things that we learn, sometimes we don't know why we learn it, but we trust with the teacher to say, okay, we learn this at some point, you're going to see this is very useful, right? In that same way, the scriptures inspire you that within us there is something far greater than the biology, which is, the body and the mind and the intellect. So one has to believe this, one has to not just believe, but take that first step, be inspired by this. Oh, there's something greater than me. Let me explore. Let me discover. So that mindset of exploration and search for the knowledge and search for the truth must be there. And I don't think most people are hungry. Most people are hungry for material things. Swamiji said also that hunger for good food, good relationships, good, wealth, all those things. But very few people have that intensive hunger to know who they are. Swamiji said, Kodal pasi, udal pasi, ullatin pasi. Yeah, we have hunger, the pangs of hunger, right? We eat something, we feel fulfilled. Relationship, yes, we have those relationships, we feel fulfilled, although many people don't feel fulfilled, right? But ultimately, there is something that we are searching for who we are. Ullatin pasi, inner search. What would quench that thirst, right? That which quenches that thirst is actually the inspirational messages of the scriptures. Like what we are covering now in Katha Upanishad, how Nachiketa was inspired by the scriptures that was taught by his father, who was not practicing it properly. So because Nachiketa was inspired, he wanted to seek the truth, and that innocent, inspirational mind led him to Lord Yama, right? And that Lord Yama now did not want to give it to it easily. He wanted to see, is this true boy? If is it really this boy wants to know the truth? Is he inspired? Only after many tests he started revealing it. So the revelation only comes if one is truly inspired by this, right? And inspiration is a subjective experience, right? So without being inspired, one would not take on this. Sometimes we're inspired to become a scientist, or inspired to become a banker, or inspired to become a entrepreneur or a billionaire. and we take all the steps. We can't dream, but we have to put in the steps to get there. In that same way, there is a minority that wants to know who they are truly. That understanding of a substratum within all of us that is transcendental in its nature. It is a subjective experience. So in this passage, he says, this is an experience that is subjective. And how am I to express this in words and things to make people understand? Because, for one to know it, one has to experience it, right? He says, how can it be demonstrated? I can't show you, but I can only inspire you through living an inspirational life. So many of us took this path by observing Mahans and all our gurus that were somehow inspired by this source within. And there was a glow in them. There was a kind of a aura in them that there's a peace, a sense of peace and tranquility that attracted many of us to that. And when we talk to them, they won't reveal everything. Only when you really, really, really spend the time, they say, okay, why don't you try this? Why don't you follow this? Right? So even, gurus will do as much as they can, but then if the disciple is not responding, after a while, they say, okay, well, he has to find his own path. So he says, in this passage, he says, the experience is so important. And I know what that experience is, but how do I teach it if we are using all our sensory organs? So he says the only way to do is you have to be inspired from within. That you may not know it, like how Nachiketa was. He didn't know all the answers, but he was inspired. And he was inspired by the scriptures to say there is something there that is transcendental. So rightly or wrongly, that inspiration from the scriptures made him take that journey to Lord Yama and say, can you tell me, can you show me, can you help me experience this? And that thirst was there, right? He says, but if you don't have that thirst, how can I demonstrate it? I mean, he says that most people come to spirituality because they want something material benefit. Well, it's a very limited way of looking at what meditation is. So here he says that pursuit of that yoga or the meditation or that self, the Brahman, is not an object to be known, but it is the light of awareness by which everything is known. So he says that the miracle is actually not about you getting something material, you winning the lottery, or you're getting a good partner, or you're getting a lot more promotion. No, that's not what it's a very limited way of looking at it. He says the miracle is actually to be aware, by which becoming aware, you know everything. So he says, and that sometimes people debate and argue and this, he said, don't get caught up by the semantics. The realization does not come through argument, but the purity of the mind, devotion, being inspirational to experience that inner experience. So here it says that, for one to really become aware of this transcendental nature, the transcendental self, one must have that wanting to discover it, wanting to know it and thirsting for it, that every moment you say, look, I want to know this, wake up in the morning, I'm thinking about it. When I'm brushing my teeth, I'm thinking about it. When I'm having my breakfast, I'm thinking about it. When I'm with my children and with my spouse, I'm thinking about it. When I'm in the office, I'm thinking about it. When I'm driving my car, I'm thinking about it. Every moment I'm thinking about it, how all this that I'm experiencing is part and parcel of that substratum that is transcendental. As we start thinking deeper and deeper, you start asking questions. And when you ask the questions, you have the queries, You're thirsting for that knowledge, is how you're thirsting. You have so much thirst, and you're waiting for the first drop of water. In the same way, we're thirsting for this knowledge, and you are going through the scriptures for the first drop of that water of divinity to touch and inspire you. It's how the water touches your tongue and mouth and nourishes you. You're waiting for that. You may not get it in that relentless search that in itself ultimately will lead it. That's what he's explaining in this passage. It's not about knowing, it's about that search and the discovery, that journey. The answer is not there yet, but he said, relentlessly you are, patience, perseverance, persistent. People give up easily, right? They don't have the patience. Yeah, I'm not getting forget it, right? They won't get it. But he said, wow, I'm not getting it, but I am going to, I read the scriptures, Guru told me about this, I'm going to pursue this practice relentlessly with patience, perseverance, and persistence. And ultimately, things become more and more clearer. Not that it reveals through your object senses, the revelation starts happening within yourself. Right? So, in this, how can one tell the story, your subjective experience, to someone who is not thirsting for this? Giving traffic jams, this, that, there's no way they'll be able to discover this. So, here he says that the Brahman is not an object to be known, but the very light of awareness by which everything is known, right? And he says that realization does not come through arguments, who's right or wrong, but through the purity of the mind, devotion, and the direct inner experience, right? When you discover the inner system, you discover all the systems that governs that. The epicenter of that starts with us and ends with us. And this is what Lord Yama is explaining to Nachiketa. It's a subjective experience. It requires a practice of slowly the sensory organs withdrawing from this material world through the practice of yoga, unifying with the mind being silent, the intellect being silent, and at that moment, boom, you experience that Brahman in all its magnificence, transcendental to space, time, and so on. So how to explain this? You had that blissful experience. Unless they take that journey that I'm describing, they will not know what I'm speaking about. So Lord Yama says, in the next class, I'll talk about how does one actually experience this. You've not experienced it. What steps you need to do to take that? I remember Mahan talking about this, Guru Sankaran talking about this. Here are the steps. But the trust and taking the steps gets you the same experience of these great gurus, great masters, the yogins that are walked. So here, this is what in this scripture, in these passages, he's saying that you want to know, invest the time for introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation that leaves you to the last part, which is actually the self that is seamlessly, spiritually, in every facet of our lives. So next week, we'll speak about how does one take that step to that convergence, to that Brahman or the Atma state. Sandosha.